We're going to spend the next 4 videos talking about different strategies for solving a quadratic equation. So this video is just an intro to that, so kind of understanding exactly what it is that you're doing when you're solving a quadratic. So again, first it's important to understand exactly what is a quadratic equation. A quadratic equation is actually a polynomial equation with a certain degree, and so let's talk a little bit about that. The degree is the highest exponent, the highest value of the exponent that you might have. So this has a degree of 1 because this is z to the first, which means when I solve it, and this is linear, a degree of 1 is linear, and we know how to solve those. So when I solve it, I'm going to get one solution. Whereas a degree of 2, this is a quadratic, which is where we're going to spend the next 4 videos, that means there are 2 possible solutions. So when I solve this, or when I graph this, this actually is a parabola. And again, it's called a quadratic. And there are 2 possible solutions. Now keep in mind, it could be, only one solution. It could be imaginary solutions only, and we'll talk about how that works. This other one has a degree of 4, which means we could have up to 4 solutions. And again, we're not going to work on those quite yet. We'll look at those next week. So to solve any polynomial equation, we're trying to find the zeros, but specifically for a quadratic, we know that our quadratic is going to be in the shape of a parabola, which is what this is over here. It's kind of our U-shaped graph, and what we're looking for is where, if we graphed it, where would the parabola touch the x-axis? So if I look at this point is -4, 0, and this point is 5, 0, and those would be my zeros or solutions. When it says to solve, it might say to find the zeros. And again, it's just where does it cross the axis. So notice here, I've shown you if I plug in -4 and do all of the work, I get 0. If I plug in 5 and do all of the work, I get 0. Those are the solutions to the equation. So that's a good hint for you that as you're working through this week, if you're trying to solve, yes, absolutely, solve in the way that I ask you to, whether that's factoring or completing the square, etc. But don't be afraid to get your graphing calculator out or go to desmos.com and plug in that equation and verify that your answers are correct. So again, algebraically, which is the first way that we're going to talk about, is where the function equals, or where f of x is equal to 0, which is exactly what we did on the other page when we looked at -4 and 5. But what we want to do in the next video is to look at the fact that I can factor this into, and again, if you learned factoring in your last class, but this we're going to review it again. We're going to look at how we factor and then use the zero product property. And the zero product property just says if you have 2 things that are equal to 0, which is what I have, remember I said I want this to equal 0. If I have 2 values that I'm multiplying to get 0, at least one of those values has to be 0, which means I'm going to set each of the binomial factors to 0 to solve, which means x is 5, x is -4, which I already knew by graphing, but we're going to talk about in the next video how to go from here to here. So the next video is hands down the most important video that you will watch this week for our course, because you will factor this week, next week, and essentially through the rest of the class, you'll need to know how to factor.